just based on the testimony I've heard from and the interactions I've heard from other colleagues, it really feels like this is being treated as if this is like the, Liberal Party campus club at the local university treatment, like he's trying to become the treasurer of the local campus club. Like, based on media reports, and this isn't just like a new media report that Mark Carney is being considered to be the finance minister of Canada or a special advisor. This has been going on for years. This is not new. And the fact that it's just kind of being glossed over as just a whatever kind of deal is a little bit offensive to this committee, but also to Canadians and Canadian businesses who have been struggling over the last number of years. So when we look at conflicts of interest, even if they're just perceived, but I think there's something maybe a little bit more substantive here than just a perception. Are you not concerned at all, based on what you've heard here today, about an apparent conflict with Mark Carney being the special advisor to the Prime Minister, as well as the prospective future finance minister of of a G8 country, and he's also sitting on your board, and we're sitting here today at issue because the Government of Canada has issued to you a request to lower your fees, and Mark Carney sits on your board as a financial advisor to the Prime Minister, and your company has just kind of said, meh, no, we're not going to do it.
I think the important kind of context here is these Canadian policy matters are not issues of board discussion and never have been. Mark has not been involved in any of these. In fact, not only has Mark not been involved in these decisions, but until very recently, I wasn't involved because the amounts in question are so small, and because we're making less profit from Canadian businesses over time because of the tax increases. This has been a very routine matter decided by our pricing teams and was not even a topic of discussion for the senior management team.
So is anybody involved in Canadian policy decisions? Your board doesn't do it. You just admitted that you haven't done it up until recently. So who is involved? Who is in charge of it? Whose email inbox or whose junk box, I guess, did the memo go to? That's what I'm trying to figure out here. Where did the memo go if you didn't see it?
We have a series of internal experts that try to make these decisions. I'm actually proud of the fact that they were willing to accept that we would make slightly less money from Canadian businesses, that our blended package would become slightly less lucrative for Stripe. But we thought we haven't changed the price in 8 years. We should not increase the prices to try to preserve a content margin. We'll just accept slightly less profit because we think it's really important to provide that simplicity and predictability.
So when it comes to the regulatory environment here in Canada, you alluded to yourself that Mark Carney's got great experience being the governor of the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England. That is obviously great experience for somebody to have. But you haven't tried to tap into that to try to figure out a little bit more how you could better navigate Canada's regulatory system? You haven't tried to utilize Mark Carney's knowledge on that at all?
No.
Interesting. So why did you bring him on board then?
Like I said, because of his expertise in just the evolution of the financial system generally. So for example, Mark and I had a recent discussion about the interplay between stablecoins and the interest rate paid on treasury bonds, like a kind of arcane, but maybe in certain ways important kind of macroeconomic issue. And I find Mark to be a really insightful thinker on those kinds of central bank macroeconomic topics. But we don't engage and haven't engaged on more purely political matters.
Right, but what about the small businesses, right? That's kind of what this gets to, is small businesses trying to make a go of it, right? Obviously they have turned to you, they've turned to your company as a payment processor, And when you look at just the general operating system, I mean, this whole study is about the fact that costs are supposed to be passed on. Stripe has decided to not do it. And you seem to be, I don't know, oblivious to the fact that you have somebody who is deeply entrenched with the Liberal Party on your board, somebody that is tapped to be the next finance minister of this country. It's somebody who is a contender to become the next leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, and it's just kind of laissez-faire. Like, there's nothing wrong here, nothing to see here. So
I think your focus on businesses that are trying to make a go of it is exactly right. I just want to be very clear, where if all businesses on Stripe are on this kind of interchange-based pricing model, those businesses and on lots of other providers, they are on such a model. Those businesses have seen costs increase over the past year because of the kind of offsetting effects of the tax change and then the interchange change. But Stripe has protected those businesses from that increase if they use our blended pricing model, where we did not increase our costs commensurately. We also haven't increased the 30 cents in tandem with inflation. And so, Stripe is, in our estimation, even better value than it was a year ago, because we're protecting businesses from these cost increases.
Okay, well, what about around the world? Like, do other countries around the world have the same fee structure as they do in Canada? Is it the same for everybody across the world, or is it a unique situation here in Canada?
It varies country to country, but our pricing constructs in Canada are roughly the same as they are in the US, for example.
But not in Ireland.
Europe has quite stringent interchange regulation broadly, which means Stripe doesn't really have a point of view on interchange regulation as a policy matter. I'd say if one caps interchange, you tend to get somewhat less card penetration and somewhat less consumer credit, but you get lower interchange costs. Whether that trade-off is worth it, I think has to be kind of decided on a country-by-country basis.
Thank you, MP Patzer. MP
Tremblay, over to you, MP Massey, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Coulson, for being here. I just want to clarify, where are you broadcasting from right now in terms of your testimony?
I'm in California.
Okay. The reason I asked for that is your connections to Ireland, which is a tax haven. It's in the top 10 now. Why does Stripe actually have a head office and organization in Ireland? I know that you've referred to yourself in the past as Isaac from your past with a nickname. So explain to Canadians why a so-called Canadian business is headquartered in Ireland, which is a tax haven.
Well, Isaac was an artificial intelligence system I developed when I was a teenager. But Stripe is in Ireland for two reasons. One, John and I grew up there, went to school there. We feel a lot of affinity for Ireland, and we wanted to build a business with one of its two dual headquarters in the country. The second reason is most of our customers are based outside the US, and a lot of them are in Europe, Middle East, Africa, etc. We need to have people there in order to support those businesses. And when you just look at it and say take stock of the European Union, where most of those customers are, Ireland is now the only English-speaking country in the EU, and so given, I guess, the fact that Stripe is an English-speaking company, it's sort of the most logical option in Europe. And
so what's the tax difference that you have as being a so-called Canadian company but headquartered out of Ireland? What's the tax differentiation for Canadians?
I'm not a tax expert, and I probably shouldn't opine too extemporaneously, but I don't think we derive any Canadian benefit from having our dual headquarters in Ireland.
Okay, I'll follow up on that myself. But so I'm trying to understand in terms of the value for Canadians here. Explain, how Stripe really makes, I guess, businesses more competitive versus just a charge fee. Because what I've been asking for in terms of these hearings and so forth is that we see some of these interchange fees as more or less a parasite on the economy, because you're talking about technology that you developed with Elon Musk and the investment from PayPal back in 2005 to today. So explain the innovation that's taken place and how you're saving Canadian businesses money versus that actually just really expunging off them in terms of the transfer of money versus accounts. Like, I'm really having a hard time understanding how you've invested so much money in terms of the value that we're getting for Canadian businesses. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I think, Stripe's mission, as we kind of describe it publicly, is to increase the GDP of the internet. And maybe that's a bit arcane, but the core idea that we're trying to get across is we want to help businesses increase their revenue. And because Stripe was first designed for online businesses, we think a lot about that particular context. And the simplest and the most powerful thing that we do to help online businesses increase their revenue is we help them accept more payment methods from around the world. And so most people who pay online in Sweden, for example, use a payment method called Swish. And it's not an easy thing for a Canadian small business to go and call up the Swish people and figure out how to integrate it and so on. But presumably, if you're running an online business selling to customers around the world, you want to support customers in as many markets as possible. And so Stripe makes it really easy with just a couple of lines of code, a little bit of work in an afternoon to accept customers and to accept payments from a global customer base in all the different currencies and payment methods. And
Sure.
Obviously
No, thank you. Sorry, I'm just running out of time. But yeah, so very good. That's a good explanation. But in terms of like, how much does that transaction take? Like, what is the real cost for that transaction? And that sounds like old technology to me. So how is that actually, in today's terms, paying dividends?
Well, look, customers vote with their feet, and we don't get to force anyone to adopt the Stripe platform. They take stock of the 50 plus providers on the market, and they can decide if Stripe makes sense for their business or not. I will say that the vast majority of Stripe's revenue goes straight back out the door, where we are paying on behalf of the business all these other payment systems for the cost of those transactions.
Okay, so you're paying other payment systems in terms of your processing.
Correct. So the idea is you pay Stripe this, well, if you're a small business, this simple flat fee, and then we go and pay all the other payment schemes on your behalf.
That's very helpful. Can you table with us the cost of those fees? Because here's what we're trying to get at is, in terms of the economy and productivity, at least for myself, is what's the value of transitioning money from the person that's actually purchasing something to actually the payment to somebody else? It seems to me that we have in between a lot of different factors that are skimming profits and, quite frankly, are parasites on the economy and productivity. I represent workers that have to get up every single day, and they are often charged with not being productive enough in terms of what they have to do. And at the same time, we have financial transaction processes that don't really seem to be offering a lot of value, but are costing a lot in percentage-wise that don't have the same accountability.
Look, I totally understand your kind of curiosity and maybe even your skepticism here, because it's a weird and kind of messy ecosystem. I'll just make two very brief points, since I know we're limited. One is, I think it is interesting to look at mechanisms to reduce interchange costs and things that different countries have done. The thing that I think just has to be factored as one analyzes that is the ability, like, part of the main thing that those costs do is those funds mainly don't go to payment processors like Stripe. They mainly go to subsidize consumer credit issuance. And to your point about the people you represent, like, a lot of that makes it easy for them to borrow on simple terms, and they don't have to go and get a dedicated loan from the bank or something. I mean, they get credit cards, and in Europe, where I'm from, interchange is regulated, but generally speaking, consumer credit tends to be less abundantly provided. So I think there's just like a kind of a balance to be struck there. And the second thing is, I don't want to harp on this too much, but I really think there's an opportunity here to do something around a real-time payment scheme that's kind of instant and close to free. And then we can sort of let the market adjudicate, well, if if payments are too expensive in the card-based world, well, let's introduce a competitor, and we can see what happens. So I think introducing competition there would be really helpful.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Massé.
Monsieur
and,
Massé,
thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Massé, over to you for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Coulson, the Conservatives seem to have a conspiracy here with regards to Mark Carney. It is an odd thing. There's no doubt about it. I've been in Parliament for over 22 years, and I think there's some merit to their questions around the relationship. But when did you actually draft Mark Carney into your operations? I actually believe that it probably was a cocktail conversation thing, that it was a good idea to bring in an elite like that, versus that of the conspiracy of the Conservatives that it's part of an operation of the Liberal Party.
I first got to know Mark 2015, 2016, thereabouts. I believe he joined the board in 2020, if my memory serves me correctly. And the main thing that we were interested in having his kind of perspective and expertise on was the evolution of the global financial system generally. When he was in the UK, he spoke a lot about open access to payment rails and central bank digital currencies and tokenized systems and things like that. And he's the only living person, or I guess maybe the only living or dead person, to have been a central bank governor in 2 different G8 markets. And so we thought, as we thought about what the global financial system might look like in 10 or 20 years, that he would provide a valuable perspective.
Yeah, well, this isn't Shaun of the Dead, so I'm glad he's looking at living people. But I guess this is where I'm going on this, is that I still don't see the value in terms of the interchange experience. And when was your technology that you currently have in place developed? And did it receive any subsidies or tax reductions being based or developed in Ireland or Canada? I'm just curious about that aspect, because I represent, again, not only just workers and productivity, but also small and medium-sized businesses that are paying for something that I think is quite antiquated.
It's been extremely expensive to develop Stripe. I don't know what the cumulative Stripe spend is, but it's certainly more than $10 billion to develop it to the point that it's at today. And for the vast majority of its history, Stripe was not profitable. Investors were subsidizing Stripe to help cover the costs of building all the software and the functionality for these businesses. And so it's been, it has not been for most of its history.
$10 billion to just be able to transfer funds from a consumer to a product in the market.
Yes, yes is the short answer. I mean, payments is kind of a funny thing where, as you say, you think about it, you look at it and you're like, well, it's a payment, how hard could it be? And when you layer on the compliance considerations, the currency considerations, all the different payment methods in different countries, the need for fraud prevention, the importance of kind of self-serve access. So traditionally, you'd have to go to the bank and plead your case and fill out paperwork and so on. Stripe pioneered this instant enablement self-serve model where a business could just fill out the form on their computer at home and instantly go live. This was a pioneering thing that Stripe developed. All of these together are very expensive to develop. But I agree, it sounds a bit funny when you first hear it. It's like, how could it be that hard?
No, that's fair enough. I mean, this is where I want to go for the future. It's not where we were in the past, though, is looking at all these layers here, because it seems almost like a Ponzi scheme from, the citizen that wants to actually buy something, a widget, and then having to pay upwards of whatever percentage to actually get that product and just give over the money, which you could do at a market or some other place face to face. But we have all these systems and different regulations and so forth that are really inefficient in the economy for competing. That's where I want to go, is reducing costs.
Look, I agree with your basic intuition. Like, I think there are some transactions where you can kind of see it's sort of complicated. There's multiple currencies involved, different countries. It's not it's not trivial. But then there are some transactions like buying something at the farmer's market where you're like, well, why should this be that complicated? And I really support the committee's spending time just thinking about this and trying to figure out ways to simplify it and to make it cheaper for Canadians, because I think there are real opportunities there. So I agree with the thrust of your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know I'm out of time.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Massey.
Mr. Chair. What is the compensation package for a board member at Stripe?
I don't know those numbers off the top of my head.
Okay, so you actively recruit board members, but you don't know what their benefit is. Is there financial as well as other incentives for board members, or is it a non-charity giving up your time status?
No, we pay our board members, and our general counsel, benchmarks with other companies and tries to figure out what sensible amounts are.
A sensible amount. So what's the ballpark of that sensible amount?
Okay, I really don't want to quote numbers off the top of my head out of fear of being wrong, but we can try to furnish some averages or something in our follow-up materials.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'd like to have those materials presented to our committee later. Does Stripe take advantage of the corporate tax deductions for alcohol, entertainment, and tickets for the 50 to 100% that's available in Canada? Does Stripe take advantage of those tax measures?
I can't state definitively, but not to my knowledge. But I could be incorrect in that.
Does Stripe actually have tickets for any sports venue or boxes or corporate venues?
I'll be not to my knowledge, and I'll be very upset if so.
Okay, no, thank you. I appreciate that. Here's because it goes back to my original questioning here is I'm still not finding the value for Canadians and others to pay in this system of corporate expenditures and then cost for actually transferring funds to actually pay for items. And I think that's what the committee here at the end of the day, as I finish, Mr. Chair, is where I'm at, is that it seems that this whole system is cooked in a way that really doesn't offer much productivity for Canadian economic development, nor consumers, nor businesses. And again, the Stripe technology that's being used right now in the upwards of $10 billion to transfer funds is quite suspect in terms of the value, in terms of what returns. And I'll finish with this. It's quite convenient when you look at this board of directors, and what the Conservatives have raised is Mark Carney, is that usual suspects end up on these types of boards and systems that are in place that cost us much in the economy. So I appreciate you, Mr. Coulson, for coming on and presenting the Stripe case here today, but I really don't find much value with regards to the cost of Canadian businesses paying for the services and products. And that's, you're occupying your space in your market, which is totally dysfunctional in my opinion.
John and I have been working on Stripe for 14 years, and I'm feeling rueful that my attempt to describe Stripe's value did not compel you, and my marketing credentials will, I suppose, perhaps be revoked. But if you ever want to chat more about what we do, I'd be happy to attempt to describe and convince you.
I don't think it's you, Mr. Coulson. I think it's a systemic thing here. So, you've taken advantage of a space in the market system that has not had government regulation or has not occupied a space to actually protect Canadian consumers and so forth. And you've done a service that actually is, market value, because you're here for a reason. So it's not on you and it's not on Stripe. It's on our economic system of actually transferring funds in a virtual way versus out of the physical way that is actually creating the system problem we have, in my opinion. But thank you. It's not your fault. You're just part of what's taking place. There's a false economy here, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Massey. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, la parole est à vous.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, over to you for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning to the witness. Thank you for your witness testimony. I would like to ask you to start off how much, because I'd like to go in the same vein as the previous discussion. I would like to know how many small businesses that are eligible, how many of them have benefited from the redistribution of the lowering of the interchange costs.
I don't have the business counts to hand.
Avez-vous quand même un approximatif? On tient
Do you
pour acquis
have
que ce
an
sera pas
approximate
perfect,
number?
là, il y a pas de
Even if it's not the exact number, I mean, we're not going to hold you liable for that. About how many?
Yeah, as I said, the majority of our transaction volume in Canada is from businesses that pay for payments separately on this, what we call interchange based model. I'm afraid I'd be worried about getting it too wrong if I tried to estimate what fraction of businesses that is.
Êtes-vous en mesure de nous
I
donner...
can say we support 900,000 businesses in Canada. That's the total.
900 000 que vous desservez, parfait. Puis,
About
quel
900
type environ d'entreprise
businesses.
pour
So
avoir une idée
what
à peu
types
près
of
aussi, dans
businesses,
quel,
just to have a sense
quel
of
genre d'entreprise on se
what
retrouve,
lines of
évidemment,
business
toujours dans les
these
entreprises qui sont
small
privées,
businesses are? Of course, I'm still talking about the eligible businesses.
They cover every sector of the economy. Stripe is a very flexible platform, and since we launched in Canada just over 10 years ago, businesses have migrated because they get more functionality from Stripe than they have from the traditional providers.
Pouvez-vous me parler un petit peu plus
Can you
spécifiquement
talk more specifically about the
petites épiceries, des dépanneurs? J'imagine
the
que
small
l'anglais, ça doit
groceries
certainement.
sectors as well as quickies?
Groceries aren't, traditionally where we've seen the most adoption. Stripe kind of was first designed for online businesses, and that's maybe where we're strongest. But you're right that we don't we make Stripe available to businesses in every sector, and I don't know how many, for example, grocery businesses we have, but I'm sure there are some.
Donc certaines, étant donné les
So,
règles sur le volume,
considering the rules on volume as well as the rules regarding eligibility, some small businesses and convenience stores fall into the category of businesses that were able to enjoy the reduction in the interchange fees, right?
Yes, as I mentioned, on average across our small business portfolio, the tax increase is about $17 per business, and the interchange agreement you're describing resulted in a saving of about $10 per business per year.
Donc, seriez-vous prêt à dire que
So could
s'il y en a
you
pas plus de petits
say
épiceries ou
that
de dépanneurs
if
qui
we
ont
don't have other
bénéficié
small
d'une
grocery
baisse
stores
du
and
taux
convenience
d'interchange,
stores that
ce n'est
enjoyed
pas parce que vous ne leur
this
avez pas
reduction
distribué,
in
mais bien parce que
interchange
les
fees, it's
conditions
not
acceptées
as
par
a
le
result of you
gouvernement
passing
ne
on the
correspondent
savings, but it's
qu'à
because
très peu
government
de vos clients.
measures, because these measures only address very few segment of your clients.
It's true. If I'm following the question, yes, I think it is potentially true that because of the design of the agreement, Stripe's customers are less impacted by it than perhaps some other providers.
Parfait. Puis, quelles sont les implications?
So, what are the
implications, en fait, dans le développement de nouvelles possibilités de
implications
transfert
on
et
developing new
électronique?
possibilities of electronic transfers and payments?
We think it's a very exciting time where we're seeing the development and the adoption of new payment systems around the world in places like Switzerland, Sweden, India, Brazil, Thailand, etc., where central banks are building these real-time bank-based wallets that are instant and close to free, and creating much more competition in the marketplace, creating enormous consumer benefit, and generally seeing a lot of adoption. And Stripe is very enthusiastic about this, and we would love to see more competition in the marketplace thanks to these systems, and we really support any Canadian efforts to bring that about.
Justement, votre collègue, lorsqu'il était venu
Your
témoigner,
colleague, when
parlait
he
de
appeared here, he
différentes
talked
méthodes
about
de
different
développement
methods
qui
that are
vont faire
currently
les
being
entreprises
developed.
présentement.
Can you confirm
Et
that there are
notamment, il nous
any
parlait
such
du paiement
methods being
par
developed?
la banque.
And he talked about
Est-ce que vous pourriez nous
payments
expliquer
by
ce
banks.
concept-là un petit
And
peu?
could you
C'est
explain this
intéressant pour
concept to
savoir.
us and clarify exactly what this is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So we really want to be able to offer lower costs to our businesses. When we ask businesses what matters to them, this is obviously high on the list. And again, the amounts we're discussing here in this hearing are very small. As mentioned, we're talking $10, $17 per business a year. And the thing we wonder about is, well, is the way we could reduce costs by thousands of dollars a year to make kind of a meaningful structural change. And one opportunity or way we see to do that is to offer an ability to get off card rails entirely and to switch to bank-based payment rails. And so we have been working on this for the past 5 or so years, and we rolled out a product called Instant Bank Payments in the US last year. And I think this is going to be structurally much cheaper over time. It's an early product. It's US only at the moment, and we're kind of iterating and learning. But I hope we'll be able to bring this to Canada and to other markets in the years ahead and offer very meaningful cost savings to businesses.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Thank you, Mr. Savard.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, la parole est à vous.
Thank
pour
you,
1 minute 30.
MP Savard-Tremblay. Over to you for 2.5 minutes. Compared to Visa and MasterCard and Interact, we find it interesting because we're wondering whether you've had the same challenges with SEPA payment methods in Europe. Can you compare both situations?
Yeah, it's an interesting comparison. I'm not an expert on Interac, so apologies if anything here is kind of not specific enough. But I would say SEPA is generally cheaper and more open access than Interac, and I think that enables somewhat more product innovation. And we're very excited about bringing our instant bank payments product, the thing we discussed earlier, to SEPA-based payment rails, and I think that could really help reduce costs for businesses.
Could
you tell us a bit more about this SEPA model? You said it's easier, it's more open, it's cheaper. We are looking in comparison to Visa and Master on one hand and Interac on the other. And from what I understand through your message is that it would be in our best interest to learn from what's happening in Europe.
I think that's true. There's a lot of interesting and important payments innovation happening in Europe. And as I mentioned in the opening remarks, the open banking policies in some European markets like the UK include a mandate that businesses enable open access to for sort of payment facilitation, which really helps. But SEPA is, while it's open access and very cheap, it's also kind of a low-level protocol. And in particular, and again, maybe this is a little bit arcane, it doesn't mandate an authentication flow. That is to say, it's up to the bank in each case. What do you tap on your phone, and how exactly is a payment initiated? And that's why we think these central bank-based wallets, like Twint in Switzerland or Swish in Sweden, are so compelling. They're a full package payment solution. And I think Canada pursuing something like that, a full package, instant, close to free payment solution, would be really compelling.